welcome everybody to this live webinar that is going to be recorded, and so you may be watching this after the event. We're hoping to be joined by a few people live on the panel today, just to help us when we're having our little discussion about the future of education, and ask pertinent questions and support us. But we may or may not have some people asking questions, so we're really just here to have a discussion between two like-minded, progressive educationists. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but people who are passionate about personal development, especially for young people, about the future of education, where we should go next, and how we're going to get there, really, I think. And that comes in the context of our stories, I think, because I'm always a great believer in the story of what made us who we are today it leads, where we want to go in the future. So I'm going to start off by asking Alison, if you wouldn't mind, to just share a bit about your story and how you got to sitting here today talking about education reform, your history as a head teacher and such like. So do tell us more.
Yeah, so I was lucky in that I was born in South Africa, but then we moved around quite a lot. So I was educated in a school in major deprivation as a coloured kid. I went to an international school. I dipped into international schools as a kid in places like Botswana and so on. I went through the girls' grammar school in the north of Ireland, which was highly aspirational. I went to the Protestant primary school in the north of Ireland, so I had a taste of faith schooling. And then I ended up in England, where I did my A-levels at a sixth form college in an area. It was in Farnham in Surrey, which is quite an affluent area. So that kind of colours the way in which I see the world and see education. And what I do is very much based on my experience of going through those different education systems. And the one thread that wove them together was, well, there were two threads. The first one was lack of aspiration. You were just kind of tolerated, you were there. People had stereotypical expectations of you just based on how you presented externally. But the other thing that was really interesting in all of those systems is that they were just delivering an education system as laid out. There was no challenge, there was no excitement, there was no forward thinking, there was no real understanding about child-centered education and what success looks like. And, I survived. I came out of it okay. I know that I didn't belong in any of those places, and belonging for me is a crucial thing. And I was also a very quiet, introverted child. I had delayed speech for a while. And all of those sorts of things. So I then wanted to go into teaching so that I could offer. I wanted to be the teacher I never had. I wanted to be present for the quiet girls who get overlooked, where people have low aspiration because they're quiet. You're so busy checking out the noisy, gregarious crowd that often what is expected of quieter pupils is there isn't a great deal of expectation, because they kind of think, they've been good and they're getting on with their work, rather than how can we challenge their thinking and listen to what they have to say because they've got something to contribute. So I wanted to be a teacher for those pupils. And then I did that. I really loved teaching. And I always will love teaching. And I know that I impacted on those pupils. In fact, just over the weekend, someone came on Twitter and sort of said, Alison Kriel. And then he sort of said, I'm really sorry I was so naughty and, I didn't behave well for you. And I only remember good things about him. And he was there kind of saying, I'm sorry I bled on your suede jackets. And it was just really, do you know what? And he's 40, and the fact that he still wants to connect, and we had that kind of banter like he was still in year 5 or whatever, was just really special. And that made me feel like, yeah, I'm still the teacher. I'm still his teacher from that time. And then when I went into headship, I was absolutely determined to build a school which was about, um, which put children at the centre of what we were trying to do, where we wanted to understand what success looked like in a broader way rather than a very narrow definition of educational success. I wanted to be aspirational for every single child. I wanted to be inclusive for every single child, inclusive of every single child. And I also wanted every child to feel like they belonged, they had something to contribute, they were truly valued for who they were, despite all of the differences. So that's why we've got the conversation now, because obviously I did things differently. I didn't necessarily want to input, we kind of played by the rules in a way. We did bits of the national curriculum, but we were so much more. And of course, that got me into an awful lot of trouble because I wasn't following the conventional rules. And then, irritatingly enough, because of what we did in our school and the risks that we took, of course, children were successful. So instead of being beaten up, I came out of the system and left on a high because the children were successful, the staff was successful, the school was successful. Yeah, I survived the challenges of not following convention.
Yeah. So courageous to take on that challenge. It takes a lot of bravery to do that, but like we'll get on to later on, the outcomes for that courage are incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's so wonderful to hear the background behind it, because I think it does colour what we go on to do as adults, and what our futures have to hold for us as well. Wonderful. And for those of you, we do have some participants with us today, really welcome along here today. We would love to have questions from you. So if anything kind of comes up that you'd really like to ask Alison or myself, please do pop it in the Q&A and we will get to that as we go through this afternoon. So, but it's lovely having you along today. For those of you that don't know me, and I think most people will have come through kind of my network, so I'm hoping most people would know my story, but I'm just going to quickly run through that because I think that just helps as well get the balance and understanding of where we're coming from, because I think we come from a similar place. So I'm neurodiverse. I have a diagnosis of dyslexia, and I really struggled in the education system despite going through kind of the private system and being very privileged. I really struggled with discrimination because of my challenges to do with not only my literacy, and actually was quite strong with my numeracy, but actually my organizational skills, which I recently found out to be my executive function skills, the skills that I use to regulate my emotions, to organize my belongings, to organize my thoughts on paper. They really got me into a lot of trouble because of talking out of turn in the classroom, saying things that I shouldn't do to people. And I got bullied quite badly actually at school as well, because I didn't have that response inhibition, that ability to not say the thing that you maybe shouldn't say in that situation, that kind of social awareness maybe as well, which is all linked to our executive function skills. So I came through the system feeling a bit downtrodden by it, culminated in getting a 2-1 from Cambridge in geography, which was the hardest thing I ever did, but made me who I am today. The discrimination I faced at Cambridge was quite criminal, really, because people just couldn't understand how you could not be able to spell or organise your thoughts on paper, but yet verbally in a supervision or in a tutor group be able to really kind of argue a point well and really get the understanding of the content of what was being talked about. So I left university vowing never to go into education again because I've been so bruised by it. Went off and worked in the food industry for a few years, and then I was taking a sabbatical and I was working in Uganda teaching English as a foreign language, and I really fell in love with teaching. came back after my sabbatical, did my PGC, and loved my PGC. I loved learning about learning and about teaching and about all of that. Went into the teaching profession and unfortunately suffered the same discrimination as a teacher from people who didn't understand my neurodiversity, which was really hard at that stage to realize that things hadn't changed. So I didn't stick around, unfortunately, in the teaching profession for long. I decided that I would much prefer to work one-on-one with children who have my challenges and support them. So that's the work that I do now. So I am committed to education and personal development, but not in the form of the system that it is at the moment, because I find it very troubling that it discriminates so much against neurodiverse people and people from all different backgrounds who don't fit the kind of common mold. So that's where I'm coming from to this conversation, if that gives a bit of colour to everybody. So I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier, Alison, which is something that's been occurring to me a lot recently, about that sense of belonging. We both you talked about and used that word specifically, and I kind of mentioned it, kind of not feeling like I was fitting in throughout my education. So do you want to elaborate a bit more about the importance of belonging in terms of our personal development?
Yeah, so if you belong, then you feel, it's really simple. If you feel like you belong and you are, it means that you feel like you're truly valued as you are. So you, as someone with dyslexia, if that was embraced, because there's so many positives to dyslexia. So the institutions that you were part of had a choice. They could either beat you up because of your organizational skills and the way in which you spell and, you know, the way in which you record things grammatically, which is what they do. It's really easy just to put a big red X against it and sort of say that's a sign of failure. But the flip side of dyslexia is that you see the world differently and you have incredible creativity and you bring original thinking to the table and all of those sorts of things. So, of course, you were probably beaten up because everybody thinks spelling is an indication of intelligence, which it isn't. And so that would have meant that you were made to feel like you didn't belong, you were a failure, and all of those sorts of things. I have to say my daughter's dyslexic as well, and incredibly successful because of it. Incredibly successful. She wouldn't be doing what she was doing, I'm pretty sure, if she wasn't dyslexic. So, you know, that's my kind of view on the world. And of course, if they'd sort of said to you, actually, Victoria, we know you're dyslexic, but this is how we understand you learn, this is what we're going to help you do. And of course, you know, spelling is important and these things are okay, but this is how we're going to take care of that, because we're going to capitalize on what you're really good at so that you can feel successful. You'd have come through the system feeling very differently about yourself because you would have known that you were accepted for who you are. I think that when I was a school leader, I began to have some ADHD traits. And, you know, it lends itself to school leadership because of the way in which you engage with people, because of, you know, the fact that you can be really impulsive and you can react to things really quickly. And, you know, there's lots of spontaneity and creativity and all of that kind of stuff. You know, all of that is about leadership. Whereas when we look at people who are, I haven't been diagnosed, but I definitely got some traits and I'm quite okay with it. But I actually think about this quite a lot. You know, what kind of leader would I have been if I didn't have some of those traits? And so it's about embracing things and accepting the fact that we are all different. You know, our uniqueness is what makes us such wonderful people. And so if you say to somebody, actually, you can be a really good leader because you've got some of these traits, which means that you can do spontaneity and creativity, and you're really good at connecting or bringing communities together, because you know, those are some of the positive traits, then maybe I would have felt differently as a leader. As a kid, I was always made to feel like I didn't belong, either because of my colour, or because of the language that I spoke, or the class that I was born into, or the fact that I didn't come from that country. So that whole thing of othering means that you spend an awful lot of time trying to fit in. And when you try to fit in, there's a really nice diagram which shows that if you don't belong, you spend 2/3 of your time trying to fit in. Instead of using all of that time to feel celebrated because of what you bring to that setting. And that's why belonging is so really, really important. And then it sort of leads on to things like self-acceptance, happiness, um, satisfaction, feeling you can take risks. If you want children to go out and become leaders, they have to learn failure and they need to be able to take risks. And we beat that out of everybody because we're so obsessed with getting green ticks and red X's and all of those sorts of things. And all of that sort of, dovetails into what belonging feels like. So, yeah.
So important. I've been doing a bit of kind of thinking recently about, the work that I do with my neuroscience and learning piece, and how it fits in with a lot of older or more established kind of teaching ideas. And I always keep coming back to Maslow's, and I think we've talked about this before, but Maslow's hierarchy of needs has been around for goodness knows for how long, but everyone's learned about it in their teacher training. We all know about it. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a kind of pyramid. Just Google it if you're watching us now. It's a pyramid. And in order to get to the self-actualization, the kind of personal development, the reaching your potential, you have to have your physical and mental needs, etc., looked after in order to get to that point. And you can't have one without the other. And belonging is such an important part of that. And it's put in there in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yet we forget that. So we do focus on the kind of the physical, have we eaten, all those kind of things, free school meals and that kind of stuff. But we don't focus on that sense of belonging, and that we can't go any further up the hierarchy unless we belong. And so there's a blockage for people. And that's why often people, in our community, they just, so the first time that they've ever had someone who really understands what it's like to be, to have these challenges, and belonging is such an important thing. And once they've got that to that stage and they feel that they are understood, then they can start to develop and to flourish and to be the person that they were meant to be. But if they don't feel like they could belong, if they're understood, that they're valued, then it doesn't happen, or it's slower to happen for sure. So how did you foster belonging at your school? I'm really keen to hear like the practicalities of it. What did you do to make
practicalities? I'll go through those. I'll share some of the things that we did. But the whole thing around Maslow is really interesting because that was done in 1942, so we knew about it since 1942.
Was it? Gosh.
Yeah, 80 years. And at that point, he put it in the middle. But I actually think it's more important than that because we've evolved over 80 years. If we want to say this is Maslow's triangle, it wasn't that important, it's kind of in the middle, then that's only because that was then, and we're now 80 years on, and we understand the importance of self-esteem. And so for me, self-esteem was the crux of everything that we wanted to do. I wanted the children, first of all, we wanted to celebrate their uniqueness. So it was the language that they brought. So rather than speaking English as an additional language, it meant that people were bilingual, which was celebrated irrespective of what language they spoke. Because, if you want to go out into the world, being able to speak lots of different languages can only be a bonus rather than something to apologize for. So it would have been as simple as that. It would have been things like wanting children to say, this is who I am. So understanding where they've come from, who their family were. So we wanted them to serve themselves, take care of their needs first, and then think about how they took care of their families and then the community, so that when they went out into the wider community, if you know how to take care of yourself and your family, then you can take that out into the wider community. So learning to take care of themselves so that they felt good about themselves. There were the simplest things, like obviously, hair type and skin color. Everything was right, and I think the fact that I chose to wear my hair in a very sort of natural style kind of challenged those who believe that you've got to westernize your hair to fit in, to feel like you can be accepted. So modeling, me being a role model in that kind of way, and then celebrating the children and their hair types, no matter what kind of hair they had. And they knew, the one big difference is some hair grows out and some hair grows down, but hair's beautiful. And so it was that kind of stuff. It was celebrating skin color, and not wanting any of the white community to apologize for anything and to embrace their whiteness in the same way that we wanted the black kids to embrace their blackness and be proud of the depth of color in their skin. So, it was things on a practical level. It was things like thinking about what they wore, so that we weren't restricting girls into passive play because of the shoes that they wore or the fact that they wore a dress. They could wear those things if they wanted to, but it wasn't enforced. Because I always wanted children to come to, that was my rule. Our school shoe rule was no logos, branding, because we're not doing that kind of stuff. And secondly, shoes you can play in. That's what's important, because child is about play. Wear clothes and shoes that you can play in. So that was the key thing. The other big thing that we did was wanting to know the children properly, like really know them. So they weren't empty vessels that came for us to fill. But it was very much, our strap line was that it takes a whole village to raise a child. So thinking about how you worked in partnership with their parents and the extended community, so that those children felt valued by absolutely everyone. So instead of doing instead of doing one-to-one profile meetings for children who were on the SEND register, saying that actually everyone needed to have those one-to-one meetings, and making those meetings possible during the school day, and getting the parents to understand how important their voice was, so that they could be part of a proper conversation with their child and the class teacher, just one-on-one, rather than that 5-minute conversation once a term in front of lots of other people when you couldn't be honest. And those conversations were usually led by the children, where they could show their parents what they were doing really well and what they most wanted to be doing next, so that the parent was then aware of what their child was successful at. The child knew what they were successful at. And that's really important. Children need to know what they're good at. And then it meant that the parent and the child and the school could come together to work on whatever the next step was, irrespective of that. And the other thing that we really wanted to do was to celebrate cleverness. So I think this was the key thing for us. I think this was the key reason why we were as successful as we were. So at the moment, we have this very narrow definition of educational success. And that is, if you're good at English, maths, and science, you're clever. Okay? If you're good at anything else, you're not clever. And we have all of these people who leave school saying that they weren't successful in school because maybe they were great at art or design or music, or outdoor learning, or showing leadership in those sorts of things. We don't measure those things at all because we deem them to be add-ons. We call it the extended curriculum rather than the curriculum. And so it means that for the kids who are great at English, maths, and science, they leave school feeling clever. And we also promise them that they're going to go out into the world and they're going to live happily ever after, because they're going to be the A-star kids who get these jobs which guarantee success and happiness, which is a load of rubbish, because how many doctors and how many accountants do we know who went through the system as A-star kids who absolutely hate what they do, who are as miserable as hell? So we've lied to those kids. But we also lied to the other children by saying they're not so clever. And often what we do is do you know what, Victoria, you're not very good at spelling. So what we're going to do is, you may be great at art, but during art lessons, we're going to give you extra time to, become better at spelling, rather than giving you the opportunity to become a celebrated artist in the community. And that's what we do to the children. We say, you're not good at maths. So during PE or during music or during design and technology, when you can shine, we're not going to give you that opportunity to shine. We're going to make you do double what you feel like you're failing. And so those kids leave school feeling like they can't learn, they're not successful. And what I wanted to do was for us to know what every child was good at and give them enhanced opportunities to become better at what they're good at. Because I absolutely believe that everyone has the potential to reach greater depth in something. And it's our job to unlock that key, and working with the parent and with the child, saying, what are you really great at? How are we going to enhance that? How are we going to organize the curriculum so that you can feel like a successful learner? And then the consequence of that was that your children began to realize everybody was clever. We had that rule, everybody was clever. And it then meant that the children took risks in their learning. They didn't mind getting things wrong in maths and then working hard to make it come right, because they knew they were clever. Because at the moment, the only people who take risks in their learning are those who think they're already clever. The others start becoming risk adverse. And you can't have leaders who are risk adverse. It doesn't work. So all we're doing is putting stumbling blocks in the way of children's true potential. And then we get to the end of schooling, when they maybe go off on school journey for their 1 week away. And we think, my God, they can do leadership, or they're really good at supporting and helping others. Or it's the leavers play, and suddenly we realize they can sing, or they can do scenery, or they can do dancing. We don't want to be learning about what kids are good at when they leave school. We want to do that when they're in school, so that we can build their self-esteem. Because that's what we placed an emphasis on. Our children went on to do incredibly well in all of their learning because they knew they were clever. And that is belonging.
It is, isn't it? And celebrating us all for our differences is so, so important. And this thing about failure, I think, is something that I find really, really interesting. And kind of our cultural approach to failure and a blame culture that we have within the UK is quite phenomenally debilitating for everybody, really. Because if you're so terrified of failing and of being blamed for something, you're not going to take risks. And then how are we going to be the best people that we can be, or to develop our country and to do better, or whatever we want to do? How are we going to do that if we're terrified of taking any risks? And it comes back to the work of Carol Dweck, doesn't it? And the growth mindset. It's so fundamental, and there's so much research behind it. And so many schools say, oh yeah, we do growth mindset, we had a course on that. But there aren't many schools that really do it. So can you tell us, what is it like to really live a growth mindset in a school where failure is a learning opportunity rather than something to be avoided?
So what do you do in a school? So you've got this growth mindset. I think it really is about one, working with your staff, because obviously staff will have understood schooling in a more traditional kind of way. And so getting your team on board to understand what success looks like, to understand what a growth mindset looks like, and to understand success in a different kind of way. And then once you take your team with you, you can then see them working with the children and getting them to understand what their own growth mindset looks like. I find it really interesting that we talk about these things. Well, I'm just looking to see when she wrote it, and I've got a feeling it was a long time ago, because I can remember learning about her stuff when I was just a really, really young teacher. And so I think it's actually getting everyone to recognize mistakes are part and parcel of life, and that we can grow through our mistakes. It's our best learning. And when you realize that failure is your best learning, then that kind of, flips the narrative completely. So rather than failure, getting something wrong means that you're a failure. Getting something right, if you flip the narrative, it means that you're on your way to becoming more successful, because you want to overcome whatever it is that wasn't okay, so that you can be more informed, you can be stronger, you can be better. I mean, we talk all the time about wanting to develop resilience. Well, why do you want to talk about resilience being one of your core values if you don't want kids to make mistakes?
Yes.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't at all.
So you're a failure because you could be an A-star kid, but you keep getting these silly little things wrong, and so we're going to beat you up for that. And then we say that child needs to develop their resilience. It just shows people don't understand that growth mindset fits hand in hand with growth, and
So important, that
in order.
It's that resilience piece, and it's that, for me, it's about recognizing the fear of looking at that learning pit and realizing that you can't do something, because often you kind of go through life not knowing that you can't do something, and then you have this kind of awakening, like, oh, okay, this is something new that I need to learn, and there's that fear in the pit of your stomach where you're facing down this kind of learning pit. I've got to jump in there, and I've got to feel really vulnerable in order to climb out the other side, because there's no way to kind of scoot over the top. And if we can help young people to recognize that that is okay, it's part of the process, that jumping in that pit takes courage, that that's what it is to be a resilient person. If we can talk about that every day, if we can model it as adults, if we can make mistakes and we can sort them out and work through them and learn from them, then that is what we need to be doing to develop, I feel, to develop these real growth mindset schools where failure is celebrated. And it's not just who's won an award this week, it's who's had an epic fail that have managed to overcome it,
Absolutely.
And, let's talk about that as part of it. And you keep mentioning a word or a phrase which I think is really interesting, and I'm still going to say something a bit controversial now, but you say, you use the word beating children up when you're talking about the way that we kind of discriminate against children and tell them that they're bad and use shame and punishment to try and get them to behave better or whatever it is. But it's something that I've realized over the last kind of 18 months or so, is that metaphor that you're using, the beating up, if it was physical, what we were doing to children within the system, it would be illegal and people would be in jail for it. But we're doing it, you can't see it because it's mental. And so the approach that we have within our system is damaging young people. And yet we allow it to continue. So let's just talk a little bit about that, because I think it's controversial, but I think it's important that we talk about it.
But it is, of course, it's abusive to tell somebody that they're failing because they're not learning your way. Your definition of a successful learner is the definition, rather than the fact that everybody's got the potential to be a successful learner. It's punishing kids because they don't have tidy hair. So many kids come away from school apologizing for their hair, because we've allowed them to think that they've got, and that's me as well. When I was a little girl, I had to have my hair in 2 neat plaits, because hair like this was deemed to be messy, untidy, dirty, all of those sorts of things. And that gets into your head. I mean, you believe that's who you are. I think that instead of us building kids up to believe that they are wonderful and successful and genius and fantastic contributors and all that kind of stuff, we alienate them constantly by telling them everything that they do wrong all the time. We've got this deficit model of assessing for failure rather than assessing for success. We don't assess for success. And then, on the flip side of it is if you are really good at something, you're not allowed to say it because then it's boasting or it's showing off. Or so it's just like you can't win. You can't be too clever, and you can't sort of be neurodiverse in any kind of way, because that is just, there is no understanding. And these are people who go through teacher training. They understand about growth mindsets, they understand about resilience, they understand about self-esteem and all of those sorts of things. Everybody looks at Maslow's triangle. Every single person does Maslow's triangle as part of their teacher training. And then they go into school to tell children, I'm going to put lots of X's against the things that you do wrong, because that's more important than all the things that you've got right. And yeah, in my view, that is an abusive way of bringing young people up. And, people sort of say, well, didn't do me any harm. I went through the education system. Well, you know what? Let's just stop and look at how wonderful the world is at the moment. Not. We've got some really ugly behaviour going on around us. We've got a real lack of community cohesion. We can be really uncaring and intolerant of each other. We want everybody to conform in a particular way. We're not modelling good values in the way that we need to be modelling it. So we could be better humans. We can be better humans, and we've got to, you're not going to be a good human if you've been made to feel like you're failing all the time.
Exactly. And the neuroscience research is also really clear on all of this, is that the brain can only flourish and develop in an optimal way if the young person is, or that for that matter, an older person, because we could all learn and develop at any age. But if the person who's developing feels safe, has well rested, exercised, has connection with other people around them, that it's so clear, and that's where it kind of links into the Maslow's as well. But the neural pathways within the brain that help us to learn and develop cannot be formed if our brain is living in that fight, flight, or freeze state that we are in if we are being abused. And let's just call it what it is. The system currently for many, many children is abusing them. It's causing them to feel that they are less or they're not good enough. And that's why we have a mental health crisis, because children are being told that they are not good enough. And that is, I feel that we will look back on this time, Alison, the way that we do slavery now, and think, how on earth could people have allowed that to happen to young people? So I get quite emotional when I say that. But when you understand this stuff, when you've been through it, when you understand there's a different way to doing it, it just feels so sad to me that we continue to allow this to happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we do have a mental health crisis, and people want to say it's because children aren't resilient enough, but yeah, we're killing the spirit in our young people. And I can remember when I was doing my A-levels, maybe not even every year, someone, you kind of whisper about the occasional person who got 3 A's. And we're now in a system where children get a B and they think they failed because they got a B. And just to prove that as well, because children started working so hard to get the A's, we then had to introduce A stars because A's weren't good enough. So now let's have A stars. Let's raise the bar so that those who got A's no longer feel like they're successful because they're, not as successful as the A star kids. So we just have this very sort of linear, we've got a very sort of, I don't know, this whole thing about putting kids into boxes and telling them, that's who you are and you stay in that box and this is your place in the world is just so very sad. And of course, we're not preparing the kids for future lives in the way that we need to, really, because the system that we've got at the moment, which is based completely on tick boxes, may have worked once in terms of getting places in university. But universities are now much more interested in the interview and what a young person brings to the table. Employers at one point would have been interested in grades, universities, and all of those sorts of things. You know, I took on a community manager for my platform quite recently, and we didn't look at that at all. They had to do, you know, like an online psychometric test, and I was really interested in the values that they would bring to the organisation, all those sorts of things. I didn't know their gender, I didn't know their grades, I didn't know which university they'd been to, any of those sorts of things, but we were measuring something else. And that for me was a sharp learning curve, because I think this is what more and more employers are going to do, because you want people who are good people, who can bring good values, who are going to bring critical thinking skills, who are going to bring creativity to the table. That's the kind of person that I want to employ, rather than someone who's maybe got, you know, a B in maths GCSE. Yes, they do need to be able to do some kind of maths. But what's more important are the skills that they're going to bring to the organisation, because that maths at GCSE isn't necessarily going to make us a great organisation, but critical thinking is. And then, of course, the other bit is that most of the children in our education system right now aren't going to be employed. The days of employment are gone. So what we're doing is saying, you've got to work really, really, really hard so you can get a job. No, you've got to work really, really hard and understand yourself and know what you're good at, because you're going to have to go out as a self-employed individual, and you're going to have to hustle for your existence. You need to be able to network, you need to be able to embrace differences, and you need to be able to feel like you can go anywhere in the world where your skills are going to be the most valued, because of who you are and what you bring to the table. So it's another line. You know, we're not thinking about what the world's going to look like over the next 25 years. We're looking at what the world used to look like in the 70s. And so we go on with the 70s approach, if you like. And of course, we're not going in that direction. So, yeah, we're letting everybody down.
We're still perpetuating the kind of industrial revolution when we've moved on. I think we're in the fourth industrial revolution now, but we're still in the same one iteration of the education system. It really hasn't changed, and it's so sad that we are letting our children down to this extent. So I'm going to encourage them. We've got quite a few people online with us. If there's any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A, because we'd love to answer those. But I wanted to get back to your school again, because I know people love the practicalities of how you managed to achieve these things. So you had a few things that you talked about earlier, which I thought were really important. Talking about things being led by children and choice being important, and play. So can you talk to us more about how you incorporated that in your kind of everyday school when you were leading it?
Yeah, so the thing that people don't like me saying, school leaders especially, is instead of doing English and maths 5 days a week, we didn't. We did it 3 days a week. And then on the 4th day, it was the practical use of those skills. So it was problem solving day, or extended writing day, but the children knew what they're going to be writing about, and they wrote these amazing, I mean, their writing was just so bloody fabulous, it was ridiculous. And that meant that we had a 5th day where we could do all of the, where we could do something that was more individualized. So there was that. We had everybody did forest school, because I think that it's really important to do outdoor learning. It affects mood. There are some children who are very successful learning outside, but not necessarily inside. So it was important that everyone had access to a forest school curriculum, rather than it being once a year. Well, you know, year 6 is going away for a field trip, you know, and after they finish their SATs, which is really, you don't gain anything from that. The school doesn't gain. And the other thing that people would always say is that there isn't enough time. So it's only early years who get to do forest school. All of the children need outdoor learning. The other bit was that I didn't like the children being punished for losing their play for bad behaviour. It is counterproductive. they need to be kids, so that they can then come back in a more sort of wholesome way, so that you could then talk through whatever's gone wrong. And it also meant that the children could be much more responsible for their own behaviours. Whereas if they're really stressed and angry and sad because they weren't allowed to play, then that just doesn't make any kind of sense. So there was that. In terms of, we did have sanctions and stuff. So, for example, if someone lost their cool playing football, then they automatically lost their right to play football for the rest of that term. And they would come to me, and they, it's just like, what happened? It's just like, well, I got really, really angry in football, and I didn't mean to. It's just like, yeah, but what's the consequences? I can't play football. It's just like, okay, so where are you going to play instead? You can't play football, the deal. So where you can play, and then big table tennis, whatever. And they'd accept it. And of course, if football is really important to them, they'd learn self-regulation in a different kind of way. So I didn't beat them up. And so, yes, actually doing a load of work with the kids around self-regulation was important. Adults, you can see the adults around us who have never learned self-regulation. They're not nice people. So, we need to give the children an opportunity to learn that. We also did mindfulness. And it started off with, me hitting the wall. We didn't always do this stuff. I hit the wall, I wasn't very well. And then I needed to learn to be responsible for my own being well. And so I started investigating a bit more and became interested in mindfulness and all that kind of stuff. And then kind of thought, well, you know what? If I'm feeling this stressed and tired and undervalued and all of those sorts of things, then everybody is. Because whatever was happening to me I was replicating that, And so I then spoke to the governors about it, and it was agreed that we'd start embracing well-being in a proper way. And that meant that we offered, when we started with mindfulness, it was optional, and just with the staff, and then we started doing it with children, and then it just became the thing. And it wasn't long. It was the other thing was not bothering with lining up. How much time do we make kids line up for? You can't go in until you're quiet. It's just like, but your learning is really important, but you can't come in until you're quiet. It's just like, well, let them walk in calmly and quietly, and allow them to self-regulate, walking up the stairs by themselves without walking up in silence in a row, which is just such an unnatural way to walk through the world. We don't, you want to teach children to walk properly rather than walk in a straight line in silence. So that's what I mean by sort of offering those opportunities for self-regulation. So the children just used to walk into school, which saved us time. And then as soon as the day started, they started with 3 minutes of mindfulness, which they took in turns to lead. And we understood it in different kinds of ways. So sometimes it was sitting in silence. Sometimes it was being led through a guided meditation. And the kids were really good at doing guided meditations, leading the group. Sometimes it used to be kind of standing, so you were holding a tree. Sometimes it would be lying down, listening to music, because mindfulness is a unique experience. And so getting children to think about all of that kind of stuff. And also learning the power of breath and the power of silence, but also learning how to calm yourself down. We used to do the thing that I've been showing people quite a lot is things like, I do it for myself. If I feel really, really stressed, it takes 20 seconds when you breathe in and you breathe out. And you breathe in and you breathe out. And by the time you've got to your fifth finger and you've taken 5 breaths in, 5 breaths out, you feel different. And so children learned how to calm themselves down and then the other bit was understanding anger and recognizing that we all have those sorts of emotions. So getting children to understand all of those things is an important part of learning. The other thing we had was diet. Yeah, understanding that what you put into your body is as good as what you can't perform well if you don't put good stuff in. And so starting off with water-only policy, where parents said their children were going to die of thirst because they weren't bringing in, the blue fizzy drinks, which were really popular for a while. It's like, no, they're not going to die. If they're thirsty, they will drink water. And after a while, all the children were just drinking water, and it was completely fine. And then we moved through to becoming a vegetarian school, not because I think that vegetarian food is more is healthier, it's cheaper. I had a school cook who was really great, and she and I would go through cookery books, and we would choose a really nice menu. We had a dietitian who looked at the menu that we were offering. We didn't get the children to fill up on bread, but if they were still hungry, they could have as much vegetables as they wanted to. We didn't do desserts. They could have as much fruit as they wanted to. There were some kids who didn't want to eat the vegetarian food for whatever reason. It's just like, well, do you fancy a yogurt and a banana? That's completely fine. That's a great lunch. Off you go, and they'd be fine with that. And then, of course, they come back and try things. We used to do bush tucker trial when we introduced new food. It's just like, I don't eat vegetarian pizza. You don't? Okay, well, you don't have to, but you can. Here's a little tiny square, and we'll put it, and let's do your bush tucker trial. So you could try and eat a vegetarian pizza, and then, of course, they realise it's okay because it was a game. So doing all of those sorts of things saved an awful lot of money. It was also getting the children to understand belonging. So I insisted on lots and lots. I mean, the beauty of living in London is public transport is free for children. So getting them out so that London became their London, and they knew about the museums and the galleries and the parks and the iconic buildings, and also getting positive role models in. And I just want to say something about positive role models, which is going to be really controversial. So the positive role models needed to be as diverse as the world is. So yes, it was getting in the young Black guys who maybe got into trouble with the police when they were teenagers and then went to prison, and then they discovered the importance of self-regulation and becoming good people, and so they now go into schools talking about the fact that you don't have to carry a knife to be cool. But it was equally important to get the Black guy in as a pilot, so that the children recognised that Blackness was not about going wrong and then coming right, but Blackness is, there's as wide a spectrum of Black success as there is white success. It was getting the women architects in. It was getting young. I had a pupil, I always remember her, Kerry. I met her in Sainsbury's, and she was like, "Oh, do you remember me?" And I was just like, "Yeah, I remember you, but you can't call me Miss anymore." And she was this young mum, and she told me she was 30, she was a single mum, and she was doing mobile hairdressing. And I said, "Oh God, will you come and talk to the kids?" And she said, "No, why? I'm a failure. I'm a single mum and all of this kind of stuff." It's like, no, you are bringing two kids up really successful. Their kids were there with them, who were wonderful, really amazing kids. You've got these two wonderful children that you've brought into the world who are brilliant. And if you're a mobile hairdresser, who's doing your accounts, who's mixing up your chemicals, who's set up your business? So that means you are a successful person. So can you please come and talk to the children about being a single mom and someone who's running a business successfully because she was able to sustain herself? Because not everybody's going to go off and become a doctor. Being a doctor isn't the pinnacle of career success. Doing what you're good at and getting joy, earning your living in that kind of way, is the pinnacle of success, and getting the kids to understand that's what happiness looks like. So yes, talking about happiness in a very open and transparent way.
Yeah, so powerful. It's so important, that we broaden our children's horizons, and that they can see the opportunities because there's so many wonderful opportunities, not just in this country, but globally and further afield probably as well. Who knows where these children are going to be working in the future? Who knows which galaxy it's going to be on? Who knows? But it's it's amazing what, if we can just get children to see the potential that they have, then the sky's the limit for them. And I think if we constantly dampening down their aspirations, their self-esteem, with the way that we talk to them, with the way that we kind of don't celebrate the things that they're good at, then of course, then they're not going to reach their potential. So yeah.
You actually raise an important point. So 25% of children are going to migrate. So for them to be able to go and work successfully in other countries, then they need to, I know, we both lived in more than one country. It takes a certain courage to be able to do that. So let's give that let's pretend that every single child has that opportunity. So what skills do we need to do? They need to be able to accept difference. They need to want to take risks with language. They need to be wanting to try different foods. They need to want to talk to strangers and people who don't look like them. In fact, the more diverse your curriculum, the more diverse your educators are, the more diverse the people that you bring into the school for the children to see, the more diverse your community in every sense of the way, the better the opportunities are to go out into a world and become part of they'll understand global success in a different kind of way. So keeping things sane and safe, all you're doing is limiting opportunity.
Absolutely. I refer back to a mentor of mine who has a great catchphrase. Says, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got, and you have to do things differently. And we've been doing it since the 1850s or wherever they first came up with the curriculum, and we're still getting the same outcomes as we had then, but they're not relevant anymore. The world has changed completely. It's imagine if someone from the 1850s was kind of beamed in their kind of time travel machine to now. They could not understand how we were talking on a Zoom and all these kind of things. The world has completely changed. So these children need to be adaptable, flexible. They need to be creative. They need to be courageous. You need to have so much courage to have a growth mindset, all these things. But living in a blame culture and a shame culture where it's constantly looking over your shoulder, what am I going to get wrong next, is never going to be a way that these young people are going to develop. And the system that we have, just in its essence, the way it's examined at GCSE and A level with this normal curve that was only really exposed to the general public back last summer, wasn't it? Not the one that's just been, but the one before, when they lined everyone up from the top to the bottom and then gave people grades based on that. And everyone was like, that's not fair. I was like, yes, that's how they do it every year. You just see how they do it now.
Yeah.
That's not absolutely how it works. Yeah. So you're able, sorry, go for it.
The other thing that I think is really interesting, I love the qualities that you just talked about in terms of success. But the other thing that I think we see in our young people now that we don't give them enough credit for is compassion. I do think that young people are more compassionate. And I can remember a guy called Henry Allingham coming to visit the school. And he was the oldest man in the world. He was in the Guinness Book of Records. And he was 116. He came to visit because it used to be his primary school. And the children asked him whether they were as bad as people say they were, which is heartbreaking, isn't it? Are we really this bad? Were the kids in the olden days nicer children? And he said, no, you nicer people now, because we were horrible to each other, the way in which, and he talked to them about how blatantly racist people were when he was a little boy. And I'm not, we know racism exists now, but it's not as, we don't have the, no blacks, no Irish, no dog signs anymore. It might be there in a different kind of way, for sure. I'm not going to, pretend that racism doesn't exist, because we know it definitely does. But what he was saying is that young people today are much more accepting of each other than they were. And of course we are. I mean, let's look at, our approach to enhance, accepting sexuality, for example, whereas before that was something that we were ashamed of. Now we've got to a point where, we're not there yet, but there is greater acceptance within a group of kids now that, if a kid says they're gay, then they're gay. That's it. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Alison, can you believe we've been chatting for an hour already? It's just flown by, and thank you so much for your time today, and I'm sure everyone online with us now will also extend those thanks. I think it's been so eye-opening and stimulating to have this lovely chat with you. It's always been wonderful to connect with you because we share so many of the same values and ideas about the future of education, and I'm just excited about what's going to happen next steps and where the future of education is going to take us. So I encourage people to watch this space and see what might happen next. Alison, do you want to say any last words before we finish up?
Yes, I think that you're doing amazing things, and I'm really, really glad and proud that you invited me to be part of your show. And I know that we've got work to do, you and I, and we need to make sure we focus on that ball and keep going forward. But I've really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for those that have joined us. I'm going to say adieu. And thank you for those of you that are watching us online after the event. Please do share this recording with anyone you think might find it interesting. Thanks so much.